Welcome to meeting number 29 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Procedure and House Affairs. The first hour will be in public with Minister LeBlanc appearing on Bill C-19, and the second hour the committee will be moving in camera to continue its consideration of the draft report on the prorogation study. So this portion of the meeting, it will be webcast. Only the speaker will show on the screen, not the entirety of the committee. Pursuant to the House Order on January 25th, 2021, members can attend in person or virtually. I believe all members are attending virtually at this point. So just a reminder to mute and unmute yourself, check your interpretation language, make sure it's selected. And that you're ready to go. I don't have any other real issues to bring up at this time. However, I will, if I can, take 5 or 10 minutes at the end of the second portion of the meeting to just take care of some committee business. So that is expected. So before us today, we have Minister Dominic LeBlanc. He's the president of the Queen's Privy Council for Canada and Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs. With him are Alan Sutherland, Assistant Secretary, and Piquet, Director of Special Projects at the Democratic Institutions Secretariat. And please, correct my pronunciation if there are some errors there. I feel there may have been. At this time, would you like to let me know, just so it's for the benefit of all the members as well? Were there any errors in pronunciation of anyone's names?
Madam Chair, Manon's last name would be Paquette.
Paquette. Manon Paquette. Okay. You can proceed with your opening statements, Minister. Thank you for being here today.
No, Madam Chair, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and good afternoon. It's the afternoon in Fredericton, New Brunswick, where I am today. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm pleased to appear before your committee, before PROC. I had been a member of PROC for a number of years, so I'm familiar with the good work your committee does, and it's a privilege to be here for me to discuss Bill C-19, an act to amend the Canada Elections Act, COVID-19 response. Le projet de loi C-19.
Bill C-19 is our government's response to one of the priorities that was given to me by the Prime Minister. That is to work with all parliamentarians in order to ensure that any necessary amendments to strengthen the ability of Canada Elections to organize elections during a pandemic be done. Obviously, I want to be able to work with you, and hearing your perspectives is very important to me and to our government.
I'm joined by two senior officials of the Privy Council Office, Al Sutherland and Manon Paquet, and they will be available, obviously, to answer technical questions or to offer a perspective that perhaps I'm not able to contribute. We are fortunate, Madam Chair, to have a robust legislative regime in the Canada Elections Act and a world-class electoral management body in Elections Canada, which celebrated its 100th anniversary just last year. The COVID-19 pandemic has been amongst the most challenging issues, obviously in generations, leading to far too many deaths and severely affecting vulnerable people around the world. Governments have in turn been forced to take unprecedented steps to stem the virus's spread. While Canadians have demonstrated incredible resolve, they need to know that in spite of this pandemic, an election can be administered in a way that is safe, secure, and accessible to all. Indeed, this topic has seized the attention of all elected officials and election bodies, as evidenced by the Chief Electoral Officer's call for temporary changes to the Act, and by your timely study that put forward several recommendations in support of a safe election in these challenging times, which we followed closely and reflected in many ways in Bill C-19. Bill C-19 proposes changes that protect the health and safety of Canadians while allowing them to exercise their democratic rights. A 3-day polling period will spread electors out and support physical distancing and other public health measures at polling stations. The 3-day polling period specifically recognizes Monday as a voting day. We believe this also to be important. Maintaining the Monday voting day recognizes that in some circumstances, people might not be able to vote because of a religious obligation over the weekend, and that both public transit together with childcare options may be more limited over the weekend. Thus, we thought keeping Monday as a voting day was important. Simply put, we're providing electors with as many opportunities as possible to vote should there be an election during the pandemic. Bill C-19 will also support a safe vote in long-term care facilities and in facilities for persons living with disabilities. Sadly, as one of the most at-risk populations, the residents of these facilities have been gravely impacted by the pandemic, and I think all of us were touched by some of the very difficult stories of COVID-19 in the context of long-term care homes. As such, Bill C-19 will provide enhanced flexibility to election workers through a 13-day period during which they can work with long-term care facility staff to determine the most opportune dates and times to deliver the vote in those facilities. To be clear, this would not mean that voting in long-term care facilities would take place over 13 days, merely that facilities would be able to determine for themselves the appropriate window for their residents to safely cast their ballots. This will support a vote that is safe for the residents, election workers, and obviously the staff in these homes as well. La tenue d'une élection.
Holding general elections, regardless of the timing, requires a huge amount of organization. Canada is a huge, diverse country, including 338 ridings that are different in size and composition. So during a pandemic, the task is even bigger.
Across the country continue to evolve, pointing to a clear need for increased legislative authority for Elections Canada to react to any specific circumstance that may arise across the country in a particular electoral district. Accordingly, Bill C-19 would provide the Chief Electoral Officer with enhanced adaptation powers to adapt provisions of the Act in support of the health and safety of electors and those working or volunteering at the polls themselves. We have seen that jurisdictions across the country and around the globe have had elections during the pandemic and have seen a steep increase in mail-in voting. Research conducted by Elections Canada indicates that potentially up to 5 million electors may choose to vote by mail if there were an election during a pandemic. At the federal level, Elections Canada has delivered this system safely and securely for decades, and there are important safeguards designed to maintain the secrecy and the integrity of the vote. Nothing in Bill C-19 would change that. In fact, we're proposing targeted mail-in voting measures to strengthen a system that we expect will see a surge in usage. Among its proposals, Bill C-19 will allow electors to apply online for a mail-in ballot and will establish secure mail receipt boxes across all polling stations for voters to drop off their ballots. To maintain the integrity of the vote, Bill C-19 includes strict prohibitions on installing or tampering with secure mail reception boxes. And lastly, I would like to stress that the counting of the mail-in ballots cast within electoral districts will continue to be counted locally. As honorable members know, there was a drafting discrepancy between the English and French versions of a provision in Bill C-19, which made its meaning unclear. As a result, we will bring forward an amendment correcting this unfortunate error during the studies clause by clause, during the committee's study clause by clause of this bill. As you are aware, the Speaker ruled that this error can be corrected by the committee in studying the legislation. So, Madam Chair, in conclusion, I would like to highlight 3 points. First, these measures would be temporary, only applying in the event of an election held during an ongoing pandemic. These measures would cease to be in effect 6 months or at an earlier date determined by the Chief Electoral Officer after a notice the Chief Electoral Officer published in the Canada Gazette that indicates the measures are no longer necessary in the context of COVID-19. And this notice would obviously only be issued following consultations with the Chief Public Health Officer. Secondly, the long-term care measures and adaptation powers would come into force immediately upon royal assent. The remaining measures, including the 3-day polling period, would come into force 90 days following royal assent, or earlier should the Chief Electoral Officer be satisfied that all the necessary preparations are in place. And finally, Madam Chair, I would like to reiterate that our government is committed to working with all of you on the committee, with all members of the House of Commons, to ensure that this legislation can be amended if it can be improved, but to ensure its passage as quickly as possible. Madam Chair, thank you. I hope I haven't run over the time, but I'm really looking forward to seeing some old friends who serve on your committee and to answering questions. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Minister. And I think there's a real desire amongst many of us to see this committee get through the committee process as quickly as possible and back to the House. So we're going to work hard on that. And we will start with questions from Mr. Nader. Mr. Nader, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister, for joining us this morning or this afternoon, depending on time zones. It's always nice to have our ministerial counterparts before committee. I want to start going back a little bit into the past to Bill C-76. When this bill was introduced in House of Commons in the previous Parliament, there was an unfortunate decision to amend Section 91.1, despite objections from the Conservative Party and a motion that I myself brought forward, which would have corrected it. Unfortunately, it went ahead and was ruled unconstitutional. And my concern is that the Justice Davies, was quite scathing in her criticism of your own department at PCO. She wrote in her decision, quote, "More importantly, the advice given to the Standing Committee by Mr. Morin, the senior advisor at PCO, that the inclusion of the word knowingly in Section 91.1 was necessary, redundant, and confusing was, for several reasons, incorrect and potentially misleading." She goes on to write in paragraph 58, "To the extent Mr. Morin testified about the import of removing knowingly from Section 91.1, his comments were inaccurate and cannot be taken as reflecting Parliament's true intention." Minister, this was a senior advisor to your own department, the Privy Council Office. I'd like to know what measures you have taken to ensure accountability exists within your department. That unconstitutional advice to this committee will not happen again.
Madam Chair, through you to our colleague, Mr. Nader, thank you for the question. We have obviously taken note of and read carefully the court's decision. We accept the court's decision. You will note that we did not seek to appeal the court's decision because we accept those findings. I don't disagree with your characterization that may have been an unfortunate circumstance. I've been a minister for 5 years. We receive advice from different government departments, including the Department of Justice, obviously on highly technical legal matters. We're accountable for those decisions. It's not the public servants who offer the advice or who we encourage to appear before committees and speak freely about their work and answer technical questions from colleague parliamentarians. We expect that to be a healthy and normal, good part of the parliamentary process. But we certainly accept responsibility for that legislative change, as you said, in Bill C-76. We thought Bill C-76 had a lot of positive improvements in terms of Canada's Elections Act, but we're happy to work with other parties to add the word knowingly into that particular section, which the court struck down. We accept the court's decision, and we would welcome advice from colleagues as to the best way to remedy that in a legislative process. We don't think that dragging it before the courts is the best way, but I'm not insensitive to your comment, Mr. Nader, and obviously I don't disagree with the substance of your conclusion and regret that was the way that particular clause was treated by the courts, but fully accept the decision of the justice.
Thank you, Minister. And I would note that it is being remedied in Section section of the C30, which I know some people are referring to as the John Nader Vindication Act, but I won't go there.
I'm just glad you didn't say omnibus, sir.
Well, I'm using my words judiciously. As you were well aware, the Prime Minister's handpicked Governor General resigned on, I believe it was January 22nd of this year, leaving us without a Governor General and in the hands of a capable administrator, the Right Honorable Richard Wagner, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. As you are well aware, it would be unfortunate to bring the Chief Justice into political games. And so I would like to see if there's assurance from you that the Prime Minister will not seek dissolution from the Chief Justice as Administrator of Canada unless, of course, there is a vote of non-confidence. Can you provide this committee with that assurance that the Prime Minister won't seek dissolution from the Administrator?
Madam Chair, through you to our colleague, Mr. Nader, we do recognize, as you said, the circumstance where the Chief Justice of Canada, Chief Justice Wagner, serves as the administrator is not an ideal circumstance long term. I think at the time Madame Payette resigned, I, in my enthusiasm, got ahead of myself in hoping that the process that I was a part of, the advisory committee the Prime Minister established to look at recommending a short list of outstanding Canadians to replace Madame Payette, I had hoped that process would have concluded earlier. The good news from our perspective is we have finished our work. The Prime Minister will have our recommendations in the next few days. And I'm hoping, like you, that all Canadians can see who Her Majesty will summon to the office of Governor General in the next few weeks. So it's certainly, we're at the end of a process. I found it a fascinating process. Our group had, I think, 12 meetings. We had 4 volunteers. The clerk and I sort of co-chaired the group, the clerk of the Privy Council, but we had 4 very busy volunteers who gave us their time to consider dozens and interesting. It was very valuable. I think we've arrived at an interesting list. The Prime Minister has not made a decision yet, but I think that should be coming in the not too distant future. And I am conscious. I do share your concern that having the Chief Justice, I can't imagine that we would ever put the Chief Justice or even the Governor General. I think you talked about political games, Mr. Nader. I can't imagine that any of us would be responsible for something so shocking as political games. But I do recognize that it's an unusual moment to have the Chief Justice serving as the administrator. So hopefully his volunteer effort to help the country in that capacity will come to a conclusion soon.
So that's all the time we have for that round. And if I can just remind the committee that the minister is here on C19. We don't have a lot of time to get the valuable information that we need in order to make the recommendations needed. There was an opportunity to invite the minister on estimates where there would have been a broader scope. And I know that Mr. Nader is genuinely interested in these matters. And so I did allow for that leeway, but I would hope that we can refrain from that and kind of really hone in on C19 going forward. Next, we've got Mr. Luzon.
Thank you very much for coming today, Minister, to appear on Bill C19. I'm quite surprised to hear Mr. Nader asking questions that don't have anything to do with Bill C19, when we all are in good faith trying to find solutions to elections issues. And we're so pleased that you're here for the full hour. Now, the Conservatives are involved in political games at the House of Commons that will be interrupting this meeting, actually, which is so unfortunate. Now, let's move along. Minister, you gave us an outline of the changes, but as you know, I am particularly concerned with seniors. Seniors are those who were the most affected in long-term care facilities in this pandemic. So what are the implications for seniors if Bill C-19 is not passed before the next election?
À travers
Through you, Madam Chair, and to my friend and colleague, Mr. Lauzon, thank you for the question. I fully share your feeling that as parliamentarians, we have an opportunity to consider temporary improvements to the Elections Act at the request of the Director General of Elections. He was the one who encouraged the government to prepare a draft report, which is a draft bill, which is before you now. Now, in terms of your concerns, I know that as in Quebec and throughout the country, seniors in long-term healthcare facilities suffered. My own mother, who died a year and a half ago, before the pandemic, was in a facility, and that was one of the facilities that suffered. And so we're all concerned about this. How can we make sure that these people who built our country, contributed to our country, how can we make sure that they will not be discouraged from exercising their right to vote? We need to make sure that they are fully capable of voting safely. In my own riding, Mr. Lauzon, which is a rural Acadian riding in New Brunswick, on election day, there were mobile polling booths that went to long-term healthcare facilities in order to allow the residents to vote. So the polling station was set up for an hour or two, often in a common room, and it was a good experience for everyone. Now, in the context of the pandemic, of COVID, we can't necessarily go from facility to facility because there obviously is a risk of infection, the risk of bringing in COVID. And that poses a risk to the staff and to the residents. And so doing that would not meet public safety measures. So we need to have these 13 days, potential days. And then the director, the chief electoral officer, would get in touch with the heads of these facilities to make sure that polling can happen safely and that all precautions will be taken. And another thing that I thought was quite interesting was this. If you have an outbreak on one floor, perhaps then that polling area can be divided so that the residents of that floor, for example, would be able to have that poll so that they could vote. And then other floors could also be dealt with as a polling area. So what that does is give a huge amount of flexibility, that ability to be able to divide up areas. Yes, and Minister, it's so important then also to be able to do mail-in voting. I think that in this case that you were explaining, it's very important in the context of a global pandemic to be able to take appropriate measures, including mail-in ballots. So this shows why it's so necessary to do this. Can you expand on that? Yes, thank you very much for the question. And I absolutely share, Mr. Lauzon, your feeling that there has to be greater access provided. Madam Chair?
C'était une réponse fascinante.
Well, it was a fascinating answer.
Mr. Nader wanted to hear my detailed explanation of mail-in voting. Perhaps I'll have the chance, Madam Chair, with another colleague who will want to hear that answer.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, we are really short on time because of the vote that may be coming as well. So next we've got Madame Normandin.
Ms. Normandin.
Oh, Monsieur Terrien. Sorry.
Monsieur Terrien.
Mr. Terrien, rather. I apologize and good morning, Madam Chair. I'm pleased to see you, Minister. In the fall, PROC examined various scenarios for an election during a pandemic. We heard 20 witnesses, had 11 meetings, including experts, the Chief Electoral Officer, Canada Post, representatives from organizations, academics, citizens, representatives, etc. And so my question is simple. Were you aware that we were working on this? Because it appears that you tabled your bill before we even wrapped up our report. No, on the contrary, Mr. Therrien, thank you for your question. It gives me pleasure to see you again. We were very aware of this. We were following it. There were people in the Privy Council office I was speaking with. We were speaking with colleagues, and we followed the testimony and the witnesses that you outlined. We decided rather to table a few days before Christmas a draft bill, because when you're in a minority parliament, you never know what's going to happen and whether there will be consensus. And so we thought it would be good to start the conversation with a draft bill. And this bill, to a great extent, took into account those recommendations that we saw afterwards and what we had been following all along. And your committee and colleagues have improvements to suggest, possibly, and we are completely open to improving this bill and to taking into consideration aspects that we may perhaps have not dealt with. So you're saying that this was a draft bill. Obviously, if there are changes to be made, we'll do that, and I realize the government will do that. However, I'm having difficulty in understanding why you didn't wait until we tabled our report and read it first. Because we're talking about timing. I understand that there's a minority government and that there is a pandemic. But I think it was on the 10th of December that you tabled this, and we only spoke about it again in March. So why didn't you wait for us to table a report and read it fully? Because what that also does is send a message to parliamentarians that what we're doing in committee is important and that you respect it. You're saying by doing that you respect the work that we're doing. And so you wait out of respect for us to table our report and to read it, and then you bring in the bill. Now, I'm happy to see you, Mr. LeBlanc. You're truly a good man, and I would have expected that from you. I mean, because I say to myself, this is a person who likes people. He's a warm-hearted person. Why didn't he think about respecting that work that we do? Madam Chair, I'd like to thank Mr. Therrien for his question. And I hope that this wasn't taken as a lack of respect. On the contrary, we took a decision to table a bill. And you're right, it was a few days before we adjourned for the holiday recess. We knew that it might, for example, foster conversations between colleagues from different parties. We knew we'd come back to it in the new year. We knew that colleagues might have had discussions in the meanwhile. And so, as I said, we followed very closely the work of the committee and the witnesses who came before the committee. We didn't necessarily agree with everything. We didn't necessarily agree with the Chief Electoral Officer's suggestions to take out the Monday and just hold the vote on the weekend. We thought that Monday was an important day to keep. However, we are open and continue to be open to changes and the work that PROC will do to improve this bill. We're not claiming that we found the perfect solution to everything. And so we weren't saying that there were no possibilities or openings to improve it and adjust it. We're open to your work, the work of our colleagues in the House of Commons as well. Well, I understand what you're saying. But it would have taken very little to be able to avoid this kind of conversation. And I don't necessarily have a lot of experience here, but when I mentioned this to other colleagues, they said, look, that's how That's how it works. You know, sometimes the government doesn't respect the committee's work, and I'm not saying that's what you did, but it is the impression that it gives, and it's not a good impression. So I just wanted to be able to tell you this. I understand what you're saying, but it could have been avoided. I don't know how much time I have left. I didn't calculate my time, but I want to come back to this weekend. So I have 1 minute. Well, perhaps I'll come back to this later. I'll ask you a simple question. Currently, cases are going down and vaccinations are happening. So my question is simple, and it's this. We can come back to it. Let's say there's an election in the fall and things are going well, as they are. Will you still implement the measures in C-19? It's a serious question because we really are headed down the right path now. So I'm wondering if you might actually remove that obligation to implement measures in C-19. Thank you very much for the question, Mr. Terrien. Like yourself, last night on the news, I saw that cases in Quebec are going down, and it's a very encouraging picture throughout the country. So obviously everyone is hoping that this will continue. However, there might be unexpected surprises. One only has to think about our friends in Manitoba. We hope that won't be the case, but we'll leave this decision up to Elections Canada. If we adopt the bill, and that's what we're hoping will happen, and if the Senate passes it before they adjourn, and I understand that time is running out, but we hope that that is what will happen. And if that is the case, then Elections Canada and the Chief Electoral Officer will have the discretion to use those measures or not in consultation with public safety authorities in the provinces. So they'll decide on the measures that need to be taken, and we will trust in their judgment if and when the bill is adopted.
Thank you. We've run out of time, but I felt like that was a very important answer to get on the record. Also, bells have started ringing. They're 30-minute bells, I believe. So I was wondering if I could get consent from the committee to continue through the bells so that we can hear from Minister LeBlanc today. Sounds good. All right, so we'll keep going and hopefully be able to we'll give you enough minutes to log on to the vote if you need to do so. How many minutes do you think you guys need before the actual vote to switch over? 5 minutes? 10? Okay. You don't really have to be on camera. You can just vote from your phone. But 5 minutes, I think, should be what most people are saying. 5 minutes should be good. All right. Next, we have Mr. Blakey. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, or I guess good afternoon, depending on the time difference, Mr. Minister. Earlier in your introductory remarks and since in some of the answers to questions that committee members have put, we've heard of the importance of some of the modifications that C-19 would allow in the context of a pandemic election. So I wonder if in light of that and in light of the importance of the content of the bill, your government is prepared to commit not to call an election unilaterally prior to the provisions of C-19 being in place.
So, Madam Chair, through you to Mr. Blakey, thank you for the question. Privileged to see you in Winnipeg. You're 2 hours ahead of me, so it is the afternoon here in Fredericton, but good morning to you, sir, in Winnipeg. Our government has said, the Prime Minister has said clearly that we're not seeking an election, we're not looking for an election. We're focused, as all parliamentarians are, as I know you in the NDP, Mr. Blakey, and your caucus has been focused on what we can collectively do to protect Canadians during the course of the pandemic. We think it's prudent. I think you and I may have this in common amongst things. We've not been voting no confidence recklessly and often every time there's a confidence motion that comes up. So at least you have the virtue of being consistent in saying that you don't want a pandemic election. You want to focus on Canadians. That's what we've been saying. We have some colleagues who consistently and regularly vote no confidence. I've said it's sort of like playing chicken, hoping the other person swerves. So we think it's responsible to have this legislation in place. But as I said, we'll continue to focus on the economic recovery and the public health measures necessary for Canadians. but we do have some colleagues in the House of Commons, not in your party, Mr. Blakey, and not in mine, that seem to want an election and publicly have called for elections, early elections, and regularly vote in a way that would trigger an immediate election.
And
so I think it's in that context that I think it's prudent to have this in place. That would be my view.
Very well aware of the voting record, but I'm not hearing a commitment on your government's part not to call an election unilaterally this year. I do want to ask, in respect of the bill itself, in response to Mr. Terrien's questions, you had noted that the government is quite open to amendments. And so I just wonder if you might give a little bit more comment as to the scope of the bill. I think sometimes the scope of a bill can be narrowly interpreted for procedural purposes to only pertaining to things that are explicitly mentioned in the bill. But of course, these are very exceptional circumstances. It's an exceptional bill. And there are things that the committee looked at in its study with respect to preparing for a pandemic election that aren't reflected in the government's initial proposal. And I take your point that it was tabled as an initial proposal. I think of things like ensuring that people aren't, having to be completely reliant on a broadband connection or internet access, or having a photocopier or scanner in order to be able to apply for a special ballot. So being able to do that in person. Sometimes the suggestion has been made that Canada Post outlets might be used for that purpose. We've heard about, because there'll be so many more Canadians using special ballots, widening a little bit the ways in which they might indicate their intention of who they want to be voting for. Currently, they have to have the spelling of the full name of the local candidate. We've heard things about the challenges in the signature requirements, as well as the campus vote program possibly being discontinued. Those are all things that might be subject to amendment, but that aren't necessarily represented in the current text of the bill. So could you just give a little context in terms of the government's understanding of what the scope of this bill is and ought to be in order to encourage the kind of multi-party collaboration and opportunity to exploit the expertise of the committee in crafting this bill?
So thank you, Mr. Blakey, for the question. And our view, I think, is a common sense one, that the idea here is to put in place the right mix of temporary measures to allow Canadians to safely vote in the context of a potential pandemic election, and obviously to allow the 250,000 people that would work at the polls across the country in an election, those that volunteer. So we've taken note of public comments you've made around the campus voting program. We certainly thought, I believe, and the government believes, that Elections Canada should reinstate a campus voting program on campuses. It will reduce pressure in other polling stations and obviously encourage younger people to vote. I love the idea, and a conversation you and I had, my rural riding in New Brunswick, there's a Canada Post office in every small community, some of which aren't even incorporated municipalities. And the postmaster or the postmistress that runs that post office, I think, is in a perfect position to be able to help often senior citizens, as you say, without internet access, without photocopiers at home or scanners to properly have pieces of ID. So the idea that Elections Canada might train these people to assist people applying for special ballots, the same thing I thought theoretically could be true at Service Canada locations in different communities. So I'm hoping that the committee, in its wisdom, as you say, will take a broad view and add. We certainly will not object to something being beyond the scope of the legislation if it's designed to further our collective best efforts to come up with the right mix of measures. And I've taken note of your comments publicly and in your speech in the House of Commons, and you've identified a number of areas where I think we should quickly work collaboratively to improve the legislation and to adopt amendments. So we're continuing, and we'll continue to work with you, sir, and all colleagues on the committee to look at those very issues that you raised and see how we can make particularly mail-in ballots as accessible I have great faith in Canadians. I don't believe that there are widespread examples of electoral fraud or people trying to cheat on mail-in ballots. I think the opposite is the case. They're very secure. But I would really lean on the side of accessibility, including, as you say, having to fill out the name of the candidate on a. I voted for myself in a hospital in Montreal in the last election. I knew how to spell my own name, but I'm not sure that some people who wanted to vote for me might have got it exactly right. So I think we have to think of the flexible, common sense ways to ensure that we can do that properly. Thanks. I just wanted to get that corny line in, Madam Chair. You weren't gonna, I know. Did you feel sorry for me that I was
the only voter for you? No, probably not.
No, my wife voted in the hospital room with me, so I knew I had 2 votes.
All right. Yes, it is actually. I've had that same experience, and yeah, I feel that could be made easier. Ms. Vecchio, you have 5 minutes.
Thanks very much. And I know our time is coming to an end soon. So, Minister, I just want to start off with some things. And in the original bill, the adaptation to subsection 214.1, sections 229, 239, and 261 has a lot to do with the following paragraphs apply if the last day of the polling period is a holiday. And this has a lot to do with the mail-in ballots and things of that sort. I know there has been a lot of talk about that, a lot of misunderstandings. I was wondering, though, had the government ever thought of putting forward that there should be no holidays, or I'm sorry, there should be no elections on a statutory holiday? Had that ever been considered?
Well, Madam Chair, through you and to Ms. Vecchio, thank you for the question. I have seen a number of elections like I'm sure many colleagues have. You're right. If the Thanksgiving Monday, I think we voted on a Tuesday in an election when I was the candidate, precisely because Thanksgiving Day was a holiday on Monday. But we didn't have the circumstances you properly noted, where we're suggesting our legislation would prescribe the 3-day polling period finishing on a Monday. I would think it would be far from ideal, as you say, to run over a statutory holiday in that 3-day period. You don't have that many long weekends in a year, but I'd be happy to get a technical answer from Al Sutherland if you want. Al, who is listening now, could or not to cut off your time, we can get back to you in writing with a specific answer to that technical question if it's helpful for the committee.
It would be very helpful. And thank you very much, Minister LeBlanc. I just think that is another way of, we know that communications is going to be a really important part of this election. And so that is one thing that we already know has a little bit of, people are questioning it. So why don't we make it simple? And a simple answer is not to have a holiday Monday set up as an election, as the final day of the election period. So thanks very much. And I appreciate you listening to that. There was another question that I have for you, specifically when we're looking at the length of the writ. We know that there will be the opportunity to have anywhere up to a 52-day writ, from 35 to 52. We have heard from different people that, we want it longer because of the mail-in ballots. We want it shorter because of the healthcare. All of these are really, really critical pieces to look at. But I want to understand, who is the person who actually has that decision? Is the person that says, this is the date we're going to vote? Would that be the Prime Minister, the Governor General, the Chief Elections Officer? Who would that be?
So I thank you, Madam Chair, through you again to Ms. Vecchio. Thank you for the question. I'm going to ask Al Sutherland just to confirm this. He can correct me, the Assistant Secretary of the Cabinet who's joining us. It is the Prime Minister, I think, that has within the legislation, when he asks the Governor General for the writ, the Prime Minister has, I think, the discretion to suggest that the length of the writ within the parameters of the legislation. I remember in 2015, Mr. Harper called a 79-day election.
And Minister LeBlanc, I was part of that, and I really appreciate it. But I would really love to hear from Mr. Sutherland so I can get that technical answer.
Sure. Al, can you just clarify that to make sure I haven't screwed it up?
No, you didn't screw it up, sir. But it's on advice of the Prime Minister. It's the Governor General's decision ultimately.
So the Governor General, and thank you very much. People did bring forward the fact that we don't have a Governor General at this time, so we have to be very, very cautious with that. So ultimately, the advice of the Prime Minister is what will decide this writ period. And without a Governor General, we will be hopeful that this doesn't have to go, and to have somebody who is an administrative person having to make that decision. I think that would be not wise for anyone. Looking at some of the things that have happened, we know that in Newfoundland there was an extraordinarily long election, and that has become extremely controversial as well. And I do believe that the NDP may be putting forward some orders in the courts. Just very concerned with how that outlined. I would like to know, as the minister, what outreach have you done to ensure that we have the most stable and where people can believe in our elections? What have you done personally to ensure that we have that in our next general election or next federal election?
Again, Ms. Vecchio, thank you for the question. I certainly share your concern in terms of what we can all do, both as elected parliamentarians, but citizens in general, to increase public confidence in the electoral process. The Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador has been a longtime friend of mine, and during that unprecedented circumstances you noted, where 11 hours before the voting was to begin, the chief electoral officer in that province, because of a sharp increase of COVID cases driven by variants, kept pushing out the election day. It went to literally all mail-in ballots. The turnout was historically low, I think, in that election, which is not something that any of us would want to see. So that's why we believe that this piece of legislation is part of the answer. It's by no means the only answer or a perfect answer, but things like making mail-in ballots more accessible, things like allowing nursing homes to vote, we think are part of the answer.
We're at the end of our time, but would you be able to table that just so I can look at what you guys have done? That'd be really, really useful. So table some of those conversations with the government from Newfoundland so we know what we're going to be attacking.
I don't want to pretend that I can table a conversation that I had on text or on a telephone with the Premier, but what we can do, I'll work. Many of it may just have been foolish exchanges. He's been a longtime buddy of mine, but what I'll be happy to do is ask Al Sutherland and Manon to ensure that any of the documents we had that we prepared in the discussion or in the context of working on this legislation, any background documents or stuff that we may have received from Elections Canada, we're happy to send to the committee anything that's appropriate. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Minister, and we'll follow up with that. Mr. Turnbull, that you have 5 minutes, and to other committee members as we go further along. I know there's not a lot of time. If anybody later wants to give some time to Ms. May, she is joining us here today, but it would have to be, we don't really have extra time, so it would have to be some members' time. Mr. Turnbull, go ahead. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Minister, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here. I know this is an important piece of legislation, and it's great to have some of your time to answer our questions. One of the things that I feel is a little bit unfortunate, and I've heard in the House mentioned quite a few times by some of the honorable members from the opposition parties, is this I think my most charitable interpretation would be calling it hyperbole, but I think it's more misinformation if I were to be correct. But there's been implication that somehow these changes may be more permanent than I think is intended. And I think you've mentioned in your opening remarks that there's a sunset clause built into the legislation. Could you give us a little bit more reassurance and maybe some specifics on how that works?
Well, Mr. Turnbull, your headset is not plugged in, I think, or selected. Can you make sure?
My apologies.
Okay.
I don't know how that happened.
Madam Chair, I heard the question clearly. In the interest of time, I'm prepared to, if you're okay, I'm prepared to answer.
Did we receive translation on that?
Yes.
Yes, Madam Chair. We did.
Okay. All right. Sorry. I think you go ahead, Mr. LeBlanc.
So thank you, and it was nice to see Ms. May on the screen for a minute. Mr. Turnbull, so thank you for the question, and you're right. I think there has been some confusion, might be the generous word for it, around the intention or the legal reality of these measures being temporary one-off measures for a potential election during a pandemic. So the Chief Electoral Officer was very clear. The suggestions that he made in his report to Parliament last fall spoke of temporary changes that would sunset after the next election, should there be one in the context of a pandemic, or at a time where he concludes, based on the advice of the Chief Public Health Officer for Canada, that these measures are no longer required. So, but it is a technical question, and perhaps I want Mr. Sutherland to ensure that he can give the committee the very technical answer on why these provisions are not permanent, because I think, Mr. Turnbull, you raised an issue that's of legitimate concern. Al, can you perhaps help Mr. Turnbull?
Yes, I'll have to do it without reference to the document, just because of the challenges. But as Minister LeBlanc set out in his opening remarks, the legislation is temporary and depends on the CEO can bring it to a conclusion by simply providing notice in the Canada Gazette that the pandemic conditions no longer apply. If he does that without reference to a date, then it's 6 months later, or he can do it with reference to a date, which could conceivably bring immediate termination to the application of the legislation. Now, as Minister LeBlanc set out in his opening remarks, the CEO is required to consult with the Chief Public Health Officer. So with Dr. Tam, needs to be able to reach a conclusion that the pandemic conditions no longer apply, and then the legislation would be null and void.
Thank you for that clarification. It's very helpful. I also wanted to go back to a previous remark and question that the minister, I don't think you had the full amount of time to really truly respond to necessarily effectively. And that was, we've heard over and over again about the importance of mail-in voting and mail-in ballots, and just how important that will be in a pandemic context election if one should actually happen. So can you speak to a little bit more about how the legislation includes measures for ensuring that mail-in options are more accessible?
Mr. Turnbull, thank you. Thank you for that question. And I think, as I said in my opening remarks, and I think Mr. Terrien had alluded to it as well, we saw in British Columbia, and what I have seen in terms of a sharp increase in the number of mail-in ballots in that provincial general election. British Columbia is still a big province, large urban centers, disparate rural communities. There was a sharp increase in mail-in ballots. The same thing, of course, was true in the United States in the presidential elections held last fall. So we thought that one of the challenges, and I noticed it when I was doing my own mail-in ballot in 2019, we had to literally photocopy pieces of a driver's license and a Medicare card to show residency and to follow the rules and mail to my chief returning officer in my constituency, at which point he returned by mail to me the voting kit. I completed it, put the different sealed envelopes together. I properly voted for myself, and then return it to him. It struck me, if you were a senior citizen, I was lucky that I had people that could help me get the paperwork done. But I think we can collectively think of ways to make it more accessible, but still secure. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister. We have very tight time, and I want to get to both Mr. Terrien and Mr. Blakey. Mr. Terrien, 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Madame la.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to ask for some collaboration on the part of the Minister. Quick answers if possible. Now, enhanced powers have been given to the Chief Electoral Officer and to returning officers. So under Bill C-19, can the Chief Electoral Officer use some of those measures and not implement others? That's a very good technical question. And to my knowledge, if enhanced authority and enhanced adaptation powers are given to the Chief Electoral Officer, obviously those are going to be used to protect the safety of workers and voters, and that will be discretionary power that we're proposing that the Chief Electoral Officer be provided with. Now, if the Electoral Officer decides that in some regions some of those measures are not necessary, well, then I would imagine then that they will have the discretion. But I don't want to mislead you, Mr. Terrien. To my knowledge, yes, that discretion is there. So I don't know if it's like an a la carte menu or not. However, mail-in votes obviously will be implemented by Elections Canada, including related measures. Thank you for the question. Thank you for the answer. The Bloc Québécois supported 2 days, Saturday and Sunday, for voting, not 3, because we felt that schools and other areas could be used on the weekend and not on a weekday. Now you feel that Saturday, Sunday, and Monday should be used. Quite honestly, I've always wondered why it needs to be spread over 3 days, because the electoral officer said 2 days would be fine. Now, from what I understood, from what you said, the third day would, that is Monday, would allow for any religious observances, for example. Is that true? Well, that's not what I meant, but I would think that there may be voters who will have weekend religious obligations that wouldn't happen on the Monday. For example, in my riding, a certain number of hours are provided to people to go and vote. Employers have to give their workers access to voting. So on Monday, people may have access, for example, to daycares, which they wouldn't have access to on the weekend. Same thing with public transit, for example. Some of those may be more accessible on the Monday rather than the weekend. And so that's why we thought that it should be spread over 3 days, including the Monday.
4 minutes and 23 seconds left until you have the 10-minute period to vote within. Is it okay if we allow Mr. Blakey to have his 2.5 minutes? Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Blakey.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you to the committee. I guess what I'd like to hear from the Minister today is that I think we all know that we're on quite a timeline from here to the end of June. Of course, that timeline wouldn't be as urgent if we had reassurances from the Prime Minister that he would not call an election during the summer, but we don't have that reassurance. The Minister declined to give it again earlier in this meeting. So I'm wondering how the government envisions the progress of this bill, not only through the House of Commons, but also through the Senate in time for the end of session on June 23rd or 24th. Forgive me, I don't have the exact day, but it's coming soon either way. I'm just wondering if you have some sense of that, particularly in light of the administrative challenges that we have with limited kind of broadband capability and staffing of virtual committees, particularly now in light of late sitting. So the challenge is less about getting it through the House, although that's an aspect. It's also about finding time to make sure that committees can do their work, whether here in the House or at the Senate.
Thank you, Mr. Blakey, for the question. And I have had in my other responsibilities ongoing conversations with the government representative in the Senate, Senator Gold. There is typically at the end of a session a number of important pieces of government legislation, including the Budget Implementation Act, including the Net Zero Accountability Act, which is obviously important to, I know, to your party and certainly to our government. We want the Senate very much to be in a position to study and to adopt those bills. We want to see those bills just as an example of get royal assent. We also feel the same way about this piece of legislation. I've expressed that to Senator Gold. I would hope that our colleagues in the Senate, who provide a very useful and in many cases thorough study of legislation, may understand that these are time-limited measures designed specifically to protect Canadians in the context of a potential pandemic election. They would find a way to do their work on an expedited basis and adopt it. We won't know, obviously, until that happens. But the minute this clears the House of Commons, Mr. Blakey, I will be doing what I can with colleagues in the Senate, including experienced senators who've offered to sponsor this bill in the House of Commons, in the Senate, rather. I would hope they'd recognize that this is an unusual circumstance and it speaks to the electoral system, which is obviously of great interest to parliamentarians in the House of Commons, and they could accommodate us, particularly if we arrive at a broad consensus in our House.
Thank you, Minister. That's all the time we have. And we appreciate your time here with us. And we know that we're cutting it short even for you to go vote. So please, everyone, feel free to log off. But when you're logging back on, log into the in-camera meeting and bring with you report version 2. that was sent out on Wednesday. So report version 2 is what we'll be looking at, and the in-camera session is where we'll be meeting. This portion of the meeting, or I guess we'll suspend for the vote then. Suspended.
Madam Chair, thank you, and thank you to colleagues for this opportunity, and to Al and Manon, thank you for joining us. I hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
you.